If I were to ask you, who is Samuel Beckett? There are some who would say he's a playwright. But there are a number of you out there, and probably most of you watching this video, realistically, who would say, oh, you mean Dr. Samuel Beckett, quantum physicist, friend of Admiral Al Calavici. And I'd be very proud of that answer. I'm of course talking today about Quantum Leap with Scott Bakula and Dean Stockwell in those two roles, and a whole host of great guest stars. Because when you're jumping through time, you're not having the same people each week, apart from those two leads, realistically. So you do get the chance to have a vast array of great support. And I love that, I love the show for that. Every week was different. I always remembered it because it's one of the things that was very much a bonding thing for me and my mother. That and Star Trek The Next Generation, which is why I think those are two of my favourite series of all time. It was one of those things where I remember the oh boy thing. But in the first season it wasn't. The end of the episode wasn't always oh boy. It was something that really seemed to come in later on. And even the first episode of the second season, he says oh boy in almost every, before the break, kind of, the act splits. It was a bit overused then. But it was such a great idea. The premise of a science experiment gone wrong, which sends this guy careening through time. And we later learn that it's, only through his own timeline. He can't go any further back than the year of his birth, which I believe was 54, if I recall correctly. Somewhere around that figure. And, of course, he can't go into the future because he hasn't lived that yet. So, he'd be bouncing around in these various bodies, and at first it was, Ziggy, the omniscient computer almost, this hybrid computer, who apparently was very egotistical, would give the percentages of why he's there. You're here to resolve this issue, you're here to solve this problem. Now, of course, it was a big project, and it was funded by a council of people on behalf of the government, I believe. And that's what the start of the second season was, in a way. It was this whole sort of fight for funding. He's just affecting these tiny, these individual people's lives. You're saying that he was meant to go back and help Buddy Holly write Peggy Sue, for example. And he has to kind of make the case of, maybe he could do some good on a grand scale. So he's trying to get them to stop the whole U2 situation, which is where the band got their name. The plane being shot down. He's there kind of fighting for this case, and of course the chair is suddenly changed to the woman who Sam was really there to help pass her bar exam, so she would get that position to authorise another year. Those kind of ones were great, where it was kind of like servicing its own plot. It was like, this is the only way we get to continue. And there were a lot of great moments, like the whole, again, in the first year, we had him travelling back and dealing with segregation and that whole situation. There was a lot there, which was kind of why I love the show. It was kind of Groundhog Day, but different lives and different days. So not really Groundhog Day, but the idea of learning from everything that goes on, but also educating those people in that time as well. I suppose if you were to encapsulate what Quantum Leap stands for, it would be compassion and understanding and tackling problems head on over prejudice and ignorance and blindness to the wrongs of the world. That was when it was at its best, when it was saying, we can be better. If we'd have done X, Y, or Z in the past, we'd be in a very different and better world now. Of course, there is the whole thing that's raised, well, if you change what happened to this person, then the knock-on effects. Maybe having, Peggy Sue not written would have prevented the death of some really important person due to, some weird chain of events. If nothing else, it might have prevented the death of the people on the plane, Big Bopper, Buddy Holly, etc. That might have happened, because he wouldn't have been there, so the situation might have been very different. But, the whole idea is we're meant to be changing things for the better and not really dwelling on, well, maybe it's better right now, but what about in the future? I think if anything like this, like Butterfly Effect, Predestination even, those kind of things, if you really start to dwell on those kind of things, you will kind of get yourself into a weird loop of thinking you'll never get out of. But a lot of people, were very unsure when the season 5 started with the whole Lee Harvey Oswald thing. A lot of people found that very difficult because, there were people who were alive and saw that whole situation with, the assassination of President Kennedy. There are people who remembered that still, and it is still, a moment that is talked about and theorised over to this day. What really happened? Who is the babushka lady? All that kind of stuff. And there are a number of people who believe that Lee Harvey Oswald had nothing to do with it. He was just a patsy. It wasn't really him. He was just planted there to be the fall guy. But having a show that's been very much about righting wrongs in the world and jumping around and stuff like that tackle something very grand scale, a lot of people felt that was a bridge too far, or to use the appropriate television vernacular, jump the shark. And it may have been part of why Season 5 was the final season of Quantum Leap. Whilst particularly Scott Bakula has had quite a good career afterwards. He's not been in like massive roles in a great way, but he was Captain Jonathan Archer, he was in American Beauty. Dean Stockwell seems to very much be just on the periphery. He's very much a great character actor. And I haven't seen anything sort of high profile with him in since Quantum Leap, really. But, these people obviously, something just didn't work and it wasn't getting its funding for another year. And it left a lot of people dissatisfied, unfortunately. We had this open end. Does Sam ever get home? But given the impression, with the rushed kind of, we need to say this is the end of the series entirely, where it's like Sam never made it home. But there are people who are like, well, if it had gone for another year, they might have figured out a way. I wouldn't be surprised if I looked for fan fiction that there is someone who's found a way. This whole idea of that was the end goal. I mean, it did have moments of religiosity, of course. They started to say, well, it wasn't just the experiment now, it was all... They never really kind of said God that much, but they were always like, he wants it to happen. Or she, if that's what you believe. But I ignored that. I love the science aspect because in theory, if we are just bodies that are moved by like an electromagnetic energy, you could call that electromagnetic energy a soul, / mind, whatever you prefer. And that could theoretically be transferred between bodies and stuff like that. So, we're given the impression early on that the consciousness of the people he's inhabiting is switched to Sam's body for the duration of that. And then, it's obviously shunted back out as he moves around. There's a lot of it here where you can theorise, you can try and understand it. But I still think it leaves a lasting legacy that, has been perhaps picked up in series throughout the years, in various ways. But the idea that compassion, and really I suppose itself, it borrowed it from Star Trek, you could argue. Compassion, understanding, and just a better appreciation of the world around you and the people in that world is so much better than ignorance and prejudice. And basically what I'm saying, I think, for this entire video is Quantum Leap gave me some great life lessons alongside other great sci-fi. And it will always hold a special place in my heart. It's difficult to watch it now because, of course, it's a product of its time. And Al's kind of womanising ways are a bit too much at times. But it's always had a little spot in my heart. And I've always loved it, for that positivity. But that's all I want to say at it for this time, so we'll be moving on to something else next week. So until then, as always, thank you for watching, and take care.